Mom, why are you abandoning me?
My mum took my brother. My dad took my sister.
Dad,
And me?
Mom, why
They dropped me off like I was the extra child nobody wanted, and never came back. 20 years later, they found me again. Not because they loved me, but because I finally became worth something to them.
The plan utilizes this toned
My
black
phone
marble
started
for the
ringing
main
at
surfaces,
9:12 a.m.
complemented by the brushed gold
I remember the
hardware as
exact
specified
time
here.
because I was standing in the middle of my office, holding a sample board of Italian marble and matte brass finishes, about to finalize a multi-million-dollar contract that could redefine my company's future. Everything was perfect until that sound cut through the room. Ring, unknown number. I ignored it.
Looking at the elevation
My name is
sketches,
Madison
this
Reed,
approach
I said,
maximizes the natural
forcing my
light.
voice steady as I turned back to the client presentation laid across the glass table.
Promising.
And what you're looking at isn't just a redesign, it's a transformation of how people experience space. Madison Reed, 31 years old, founder and CEO of Reed Interior Studio. I'm 5'7", lean from years of living on caffeine and deadlines, with dark brown hair usually pulled into a low, controlled bun. People say my eyes are sharp, calculating, but they don't know it's because I've spent most of my life watching for exits. Control is my armor. Precision is how I survive. The phone rang again. Same number. I flipped it face down without looking. Across from me sat Daniel Whitmore, a man in his early 50s, tall, with a solid build, softened slightly by age and comfort. His silver-streaked hair was always perfectly styled, and his tailored navy suit hugged the quiet confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Daniel wasn't just a client. He was a real estate developer, known for turning entire blocks into luxury statements. Calm, composed, but ruthless in negotiation. The kind of man who respected results, not excuses. "You all right, Ms. Reed?" he asked, his voice low, observant. "Perfectly," I replied, offering a small, controlled smile. Lie. My phone buzzed again, this time a third call. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table, because something about the number felt wrong. Familiar. Like a memory my body recognized before my mind allowed it. From the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan Cole, my assistant, shift uneasily. Ethan was 27, tall and slightly lanky, with soft brown hair that never quite stayed in place. He wore his concern openly, too openly sometimes. Loyal, detail-oriented, and painfully empathetic. The kind of person who notices everything, especially when something is off. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Madison, you've had 3 calls in 5 minutes. Do you want me to screen it?" "No," I said too quickly, too sharp. Ethan paused, studying me, but nodded anyway. "Okay." The phone stopped ringing. Silence returned. And somehow, it felt worse. I exhaled slowly, forcing my attention back to the presentation. I walked Daniel through the layout, the lighting concept, the flow of space, but my mind wasn't in the room anymore. Because that number, it wasn't saved. But I knew it. Not logically, not clearly, but deep down, in the place where old wounds never fully close, I knew. Ring again. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stared at the screen this time. Unknown number. But my hand trembled as I reached for it. And suddenly, I wasn't 31 anymore. I was 8, sitting on a hard plastic chair, holding a small suitcase that wasn't packed properly, listening to voices that said things like, "Just for a little while," and "We'll come back soon." They didn't. And now, 20 years later, the silence had finally ended. I let the phone ring. 5 seconds. 10. 30. I turned it face down again, because I had built something too important to let the past walk in uninvited. Because some doors, once closed, are not meant to be opened again. Ms. Reed, Daniel's voice cut through gently. Shall we continue? I looked up, smiled. Yes, I said. Let's finish this. But deep down, I already knew this wasn't over. Before everything broke, we looked like a normal family in Denver. We lived in a modest 2-story house with peeling white paint and a narrow backyard where my mother insisted on planting flowers that never quite bloomed. My mother, Elaine Reed, was 38 then, tall, slim, always dressed neatly even when exhausted, with sharp cheekbones and a controlled smile that rarely reached her eyes. She worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic, polite to strangers, distant at home. My father, Robert Reed, 42, was broader, slightly hunched from years of warehouse work, with rough hands and a voice that used to carry warmth before stress wore it down into something quieter, colder. That night, we sat around the dinner table, Lucas joking about school, Sophie playing with her fork, and me watching them all too carefully, sensing something was already slipping. Lucas, my older brother, was 12, tall for his age, with messy, dark hair and a natural ease that made adults trust him instantly. He was calm, observant, and knew when to stay quiet, a skill that would later save him. Sophie, my little sister, only 6, had soft blonde curls and wide, innocent eyes, the kind of child who clung tightly to whoever made her feel safe. And me? I was the middle child, 8 years old enough to notice the silence between words, young enough to believe it could still be fixed. Dinner that night was too quiet in the wrong places. My father barely spoke. My mother smiled too quickly. Even Lucas stopped joking halfway through, sensing the tension pressing down on all of us. The argument started later, behind a closed bedroom door, but in a house that small, walls didn't mean much. I stood barefoot in the hallway, my back pressed against the wall, listening. "We can't keep doing this, Robert," my mother's voice snapped, no longer polite, no longer controlled. "Then what do you want me to do?" my father shot back, frustration cracking through his tone. Their voices rose, collided, broke apart. Then came the words that changed everything. Divorce. I didn't fully understand the word, but I understood the weight of it, the way it settled into the house like something permanent. A week later, they sat us down at the kitchen table, speaking softly, like gentle voices could soften a hard truth. They said it wasn't our fault. They said they both loved us. But love sounded different when it came with decisions. My mother spoke first. She wanted Lucas. "He's responsible," she said, her voice practical, detached, like she was explaining something obvious. My father didn't argue. He nodded, then said he would take Sophie. "She needs me," he added, pulling her closer as she leaned into him instinctively. I sat there, waiting for someone to say my name. They didn't. That night, I stood outside their bedroom again, but this time I understood exactly what I was listening for. "You take her," my mother said sharply. "I already have Lucas." My father exhaled heavily. "I can barely handle one kid right now. Madison she's too much." Too much. The words hit harder than any shout. There was a pause, then my mother spoke again, quieter this time, but colder. "Maybe just for a while. There are places, temporary care, until things settle." Temporary. A word that sounded gentle, but felt like being pushed out of something I couldn't climb back into. 2 days later, My suitcase was packed. Not carefully, just quickly, like it was something to be done and forgotten. My mother avoided my eyes. My father kept checking his watch. Lucas stayed in his room. Sophie wasn't there. No one said the word abandonment. They said, just for a little while. They said, it's what's best. But I had already heard the truth through a closed door. I wasn't being sent away because there was no choice. I was being sent away because I was the easiest one to leave behind. Hope Haven Children's Centre was quieter than I expected, but not in a comforting way. It was the kind of silence that felt practiced, like everyone inside had already learned not to expect too much. The building sat behind a chain-link fence, pale yellow paint fading under years of neglect, with narrow windows that barely let the sunlight in. The woman who signed me in was Mrs. Carter, late 50s, short and sturdy, with thinning grey hair pulled into a tight bun. Her expression kind, but tired in a way that suggested she had seen too many children arrive the same way I did. She spoke gently, explained rules, showed me my bed, but there was something in her eyes that told me she didn't believe the word temporary any more than I did. That first night, I lay in a narrow twin bed, listening to unfamiliar breathing in the dark, realizing that I was no longer part of any home, just placed somewhere in between. The girl in the bed across from me introduced herself the next morning. Tanya, maybe 10, thin with sharp features and cropped black hair, the kind of kid who looked older than she was because life had forced her to grow up too fast. She watched me unpack my small suitcase, if throwing clothes into a drawer counted as unpacking, and asked one simple question. Did they say they'd come back? I nodded, because that was still the version of the story I was holding on to. She shrugged, not cruelly, just honestly, and said, "They always say that." Then she turned away, like she had handed me a truth and didn't need to explain it further. That was the first time something inside me cracked, not loudly, not completely, just enough to let doubt in. Days turned into routines, and routines turned into survival. Wake up, make your bed tight, line up for breakfast, don't speak unless spoken to, don't cry where others can see. I learned quickly that emotions made you visible, and visibility made you vulnerable. The staff, like Mrs. Carter, did their best, but they were stretched thin, moving from child to child like they were trying to hold water in their hands. I stopped asking when my parents would come back because I noticed how their answers changed, from soon to we're waiting for updates. There was a difference between those two sentences, and I felt it settle into my bones. A few weeks later, I was moved into foster care, and that was when I learned the second rule. Being placed didn't mean being wanted. My first foster home belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, both in their early 40s. Mr. Jenkins was a heavy-set man with a permanent frown line between his brows, the kind of person who avoided eye contact and spoke only when necessary. Mrs. Jenkins was quieter, mid-height with tired eyes, and a voice that carried no warmth, only obligation. They already had 3 boys, loud and restless, and the house always felt crowded in a way that left no space for me. I wasn't introduced as Madison, I was the new placement. My clothes stayed in a plastic bag for weeks. I slept on a fold-out couch, and every time a check arrived in the mail, I noticed how Mrs. Jenkins's mood lifted just slightly. That was when I understood something no one had explained. Some families didn't take kids in because they cared. They did it because they were paid to. I wasn't a daughter. I was a transaction, a number attached to paperwork. That realization didn't break me the way I thought it would. Instead, it made something inside me go quiet. If I didn't expect anything, nothing could be taken from me again. So I stopped asking questions. I stopped reacting. I learned to move through rooms without being noticed, to speak only when necessary, to make myself smaller, quieter, easier. By the time weeks turned into months, I had mastered it, the art of disappearing. Not physically, but emotionally. I smiled when expected, nodded when spoken to, and kept everything else locked away somewhere no one could reach. Because the truth was simple, and I understood it now in a way no 8-year-old should ever have to. People don't leave what they can't see. So I made sure no one ever really saw me again. The school I was transferred to after the Jenkins house sat on the edge of a quieter neighbourhood. Older brick walls, chipped paint, and classrooms that smelled faintly of dust and cleaning spray. It wasn't better, just different. By then, I had perfected the routine. Sit in the back, don't speak unless called on, finish your work, leave quietly. Invisible. That worked everywhere. Until I met Mrs. Harper. She was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with soft auburn hair that she wore loose around her shoulders, and eyes that didn't just look at people, they noticed them. There was a calm steadiness about her, like someone who had learned patience the hard way. Later, I would learn she had lost a child years ago, and maybe that was why she never looked at students like they were temporary. The first time she called my name in art class, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Seen. It started small. A broken shelf in the art room, a cluttered space no one cared enough to fix. While other students ignored it, I stayed behind after class and started rearranging things, stacking materials by colour, aligning brushes, using scraps of cardboard to create makeshift dividers. I didn't think of it as design. I thought of it as control, order, something I could fix when everything else couldn't be. Mrs. Harper came back into the room quietly and watched me without interrupting. "You see things differently, don't you?" she said finally. I froze, instinctively ready to apologize, to explain, to shrink. But she didn't sound upset. She sounded curious. That confused me more than anger ever had. A week later, she gave us a class assignment to redesign a small space using only recycled materials. Most students treated it like busy work. I didn't. I stayed up that night sketching, planning, thinking about how space could feel different, how it could change the way people moved, breathed, existed. I used cardboard, fabric scraps, and old magazine pages to build a miniature model, not perfect, but intentional. When I handed it in, I didn't look at her. I had already learned not to expect anything. But the next day, she held my project up in front of the class. "This," she said, "is not just creativity. This is understanding structure, flow, purpose." My chest tightened in a way that felt almost painful. No one had ever described me like that before. Mrs. Harper didn't stop there. She started keeping me after class, not as punishment, but as opportunity. She showed me basic design principles, perspective drawing, how to think beyond survival and into creation. Then one afternoon, she placed a form in front of me. "There's a regional student design competition," she said, "and a scholarship tied to it." I stared at the paper like it was written in a language I didn't understand. People like me didn't win things like that. People like me didn't apply. She must have seen the doubt on my face, because she leaned forward slightly, her voice firm but gentle. "Madison, being overlooked doesn't mean you're ordinary. It just means no one has been paying attention." We worked on that application together. She helped me refine my ideas, taught me how to present them, how to speak about my work like it had value. And slowly, something inside me started to shift. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough to make space for something new. Hope, maybe, or belief. When I submitted my design, my hands were shaking, but not from fear this time, from the possibility that I might actually be more than the invisible girl I had trained myself to be. I left the system with a single duffel bag, a folder of paperwork I barely understood, and a bus ticket to Chicago that felt more like a gamble than a plan. At 18, freedom didn't feel like relief. It felt like standing on the edge of something with no safety net underneath. The city was louder than anything I had ever known. Tall glass buildings cutting into the sky. People moving fast like they all had somewhere important to be. I told myself I would become one of them. Not invisible, not temporary, permanent. My first job was at a small diner on the north side, where I worked as a server from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. The owner, Mr. Alvarez, was a stocky man in his late 50s with a thick moustache and a voice that sounded harsh but carried unexpected kindness. He had immigrated decades ago and believed hard work should always be rewarded, even if life rarely played fair. He didn't ask about my past, and for that, I stayed. The mornings were relentless. Coffee refills, rushed orders, customers who barely looked at me. But I learned quickly, because survival had already trained me well. By the time my shift ended, my feet ached and my back burned, but I didn't go home. I couldn't afford to. Instead, I found my way into design the only way I knew how, quietly, from the outside. I started taking small freelance jobs online, redesigning spaces digitally for clients who didn't know or care who I was. Nights were spent hunched over a second-hand laptop in a cramped, rented room, teaching myself software, studying layouts, making mistakes I couldn't afford, but kept making anyway. Sleep became optional. Progress didn't. That was where I met Lena Brooks. She was 24, a few years older than me, with sharp features, warm brown skin, and a confidence that filled every room she walked into. Lena had grown up in Chicago, studied business, and carried herself like someone who understood how the world worked and wasn't afraid to play the game. We met at a shared workspace I could barely afford, where she noticed me reworking the same layout over and over again. "You're underpricing yourself," she said the first time we spoke, leaning against my desk like she already knew me. I almost laughed. I wasn't even sure I had the right to price myself at all. But Lena didn't see me as a foster kid trying to survive. She saw potential, raw and unpolished. And more importantly, she knew how to turn that into something real. With Lena's help, I started thinking differently, not just about design, but about business. She taught me how to negotiate, how to present my work, how to stop apologizing for taking up space. My first real opportunity came through her, a small apartment redesign for a friend of hers who couldn't pay much. So I did it for free. Not because I didn't need the money, I desperately did, but because I needed proof. The apartment belonged to Ryan Mitchell, a 29-year-old photographer with messy blonde hair, an easy smile, and a chaotic lifestyle that showed in every corner of his space. He didn't care about perfection, he cared about feeling. That gave me freedom. I worked with what I had, cheap materials, limited budget, but full control. When it was finished, the space didn't just look better, it felt different, lighter, intentional. Ryan posted photos of the apartment online, tagged me. That was all it took. One post turned into messages. Messages turned into small jobs. Small jobs turned into something that finally felt like movement instead of survival. For the first time, I wasn't just getting through the day. I was building something. From nothing. From scraps. From a life that was never supposed to lead anywhere. And for the first time since I was 8 years old, I felt something unfamiliar but steady. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was creating. The first time I saw my company name printed on glass, Reed Interior Studio. I stood outside for a full minute before walking in, just to make sure it was real. The office wasn't large, not at the beginning, but it was intentional. Clean lines, warm lighting, open space that invited people to stay instead of leave. Every detail mattered, because I understood what it meant to feel like you didn't belong anywhere. Now I was creating places where people could. Work came steadily at first, then all at once. Referrals turned into contracts, contracts into long-term clients. And somewhere in the middle of all that growth, I met Noah Carter, He was 34, tall and lean, with dark hair always slightly out of place, like he had run his hands through it one too many times while thinking. Noah had the kind of quiet confidence that didn't demand attention, but held it anyway. As an architect, he saw structure the way I saw space, complementary, not competing. But what stood out most was his patience. People like me notice patience. It means safety. We met on a joint project, his firm handling structural redesign, mine responsible for interior transformation. At first, it was strictly professional. He asked direct questions, listened carefully, and never interrupted. A rare quality in an industry full of people who liked hearing themselves talk. Over time, those conversations stretched beyond work. Coffee turned into late dinners after long site visits. He never pushed me to share more than I was ready to. When I did speak, he didn't try to fix it. He just stayed. That was new for me. Stability, I learned, doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it shows up quietly and refuses to leave. As the business expanded, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I started hiring people from the foster system. Not as charity, not as a statement, but because I knew what it felt like to be overlooked despite being capable. One of my first hires was Jasmine Lee, 22, petite, with sharp eyes and a guarded posture that reminded me too much of my younger self. She spoke little at first, kept her head down, worked twice as hard as anyone else in the room. I recognized that pattern immediately. It wasn't discipline, it was survival. Over time, as she realized she wasn't going to be replaced or dismissed, she started speaking more, contributing ideas that were precise, thoughtful, and unexpectedly bold. Watching that shift felt personal, like I was witnessing a version of myself finally given room to exist. The turning point came when a local magazine published a feature on emerging design firms in Chicago. I almost declined the interview. Exposure had never been something I trusted, but Lena insisted, and she was usually right about things like that. The article came out 2 weeks later. A full spread, photos of my work, a short interview, and a headline that made me pause longer than I expected. Self-made success. Madison Reed redefines modern living. I read it twice. Not because I believed it immediately, but because I was trying to understand how the world could see something in me that I had spent years trying to prove to myself. The business grew faster after that. Bigger clients, larger projects, a team that slowly became more than just employees. And through it all, Noah stayed. Steady, present, never threatened by my ambition, never trying to control it. He didn't complete me. He didn't need to. I had already learned how to stand on my own. What he offered was something different. Balance. Respect. Space to be both strong and uncertain without fear of being left behind. For the first time in my life, I wasn't building something just to survive. I was building a life. One that didn't depend on who stayed or who left. One that belonged entirely to me. The calls didn't stop after that first day. They multiplied. Unknown numbers, then voicemails, then messages that started polite and slowly turned urgent. I ignored them all until Lena walked into my office, phone in hand, expression sharper than usual. "You might want to hear this," she said. Lena Brooks, still the same confident, sharp-minded woman I had met years ago, now the operational backbone of my company, wasn't the type to bring problems without solutions. She had done what she always did when something didn't feel right. She investigated. "Your family didn't just suddenly remember you," she continued, placing printed documents on my desk. "They're in trouble." I didn't touch the papers at first. I didn't need to. Something in my chest had already started tightening. My father, Robert Reed, now 62, had been diagnosed with a severe heart condition, untreated for too long, worsened by years of stress and neglect. The man I remembered as distant but strong was now described in medical reports as fragile, at risk, financially unstable. My mother, Elaine Reed, had remarried after the divorce, but that marriage had ended badly. Bankruptcy filings, debt accumulation, legal disputes. The controlled, composed woman who once made decisions like they were calculations had lost control of her own life. And Lucas, my older brother, now 35, had lost his job after being caught in what Lena described as a financial misconduct investigation. Not criminal, but enough to end his career. I stared at the papers, not because I cared what had happened to them, but because I understood why they were calling now. "They didn't look for you when they were stable," Lena said quietly. "They're looking now because you're not the same girl they left." She didn't need to say the rest. I had built something visible, something valuable. And now, suddenly, I existed again. That night, I listened to the voicemails. Lucas, his voice older, heavier, but still familiar. "Maddie, I know I don't deserve this, but please call me back." My mother's message came next, her tone softer than I remembered, almost fragile. "We need to talk. There's so much you don't understand." Then my father, his voice slower, weaker. I want to make things right." I sat there in my apartment, phone in hand, feeling something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Not just anger. Something worse. Hope. The kind that doesn't die easily, even when it should. 2 days later, I got a message that felt different. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't rehearsed. It was simple. Sophie. "Hi, it's me. I don't know if I have the right to ask this, but can we meet? Just us." I stared at the screen longer than I wanted to admit. Sophie, my little sister, now 29. The last time I saw her, she was a child who clung to our father's hand like it was the only safe place in the world. Lena had told me she hadn't known the truth for years, that she had been told I was with relatives, then told different versions until she stopped asking. I didn't know if that made it better or worse. Noah found me in the kitchen later that night, standing still, not cooking, not moving. "They reached out, didn't they?" he said gently. He didn't ask how I felt. He already knew it wouldn't be simple. I nodded. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to shut the door completely, protect everything I had built from the people who had once decided I wasn't worth keeping. But another part, the quieter, more dangerous part, wanted something I couldn't admit out loud. To be chosen. Even now. I sat with that conflict longer than I expected. Anger was easy. It was familiar. But this was complicated. Because they didn't come back when I needed them. They came back when I became someone they needed. I chose my office for the meeting because it was the one place no one had ever taken from me. Floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines, soft lighting, every detail intentional, every corner earned. When they walked in, they didn't belong to this space. Not because they weren't welcome, but because they had never been part of what built it. My father, Robert Reed, looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, shoulders slightly collapsed inward, his once steady presence replaced by something fragile. My mother, Elaine Reed, still carried herself with that same controlled posture, but it cracked at the edges now, anxiety visible in the way her fingers kept twisting together. Lucas stood behind them, quiet, avoiding eye contact, the confidence he once had replaced by something uncertain, almost apologetic. And Sophie, She was the only one who looked directly at me. She had grown into a woman who carried softness without weakness. Long blonde hair pulled back neatly, eyes tired but honest, like someone who had spent years trying to understand something no one would explain to her. No one spoke at first. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy, filled with everything that had never been said. Finally, my mother stepped forward. "Madison," she began, her voice trembling slightly. I raised my hand, stopping her before she could continue. "No," I said calmly. "You don't get to start with my name like nothing happened." My voice didn't shake. That surprised even me. I walked past them, placed a folder on the table, and opened it slowly. Documents, records, proof. Years of silence written in official language. Then I looked at them, one by one, and said the sentence I had carried for most of my life. "You didn't lose me. You left me." No one argued. They couldn't. Because truth doesn't need defending when it's this clear. My father sat down heavily, his hands trembling slightly. "I know," he said quietly, "and I don't expect forgiveness." Lucas tried to speak next, but stopped halfway, like he didn't know which version of himself had the right to talk. My mother cried, soft at first, then openly, but I didn't feel the need to comfort her. That part of me was gone. What remained was something stronger. Boundaries. "I'm not here to fix your lives," I said, my tone steady, controlled. "I didn't build this," I gestured around the room, "so you could come back and use it when things got hard." My words landed exactly where they needed to. Not cruel, not loud, just final. My father nodded slowly, like he had already known that was how this would end. My mother tried to speak again, but I shook my head. No more explanations, no more rewriting what happened. Then I turned to Sophie, the only one I hadn't closed the door on completely. "You asked to meet," I said, "so this is me meeting you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "Not everything, not like this." I believed her. Not fully, not blindly, but enough. "If we do this," I continued, "it's separate. No pressure, no pretending. Just truth." She nodded immediately, like that was more than she expected. Maybe it was. The meeting didn't last long after that. There was nothing left to negotiate. They stood up, one by one, and walked out of the life they had once chosen to leave me out of. But this time, it wasn't abandonment. It was my decision. Weeks later, Sophie moved to Chicago. Not into my home, not into my life completely, but close enough to begin again, slowly, carefully, on terms we both understood. And me? I did what I always did. I built something. This time, not a company, but a foundation. A program for kids aging out of the foster system, offering them what I never had. Stability, opportunity, a place that didn't disappear when things got inconvenient. Because family isn't about who shares your blood. It's about who stays when leaving would be easier. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. So, if you were in my place, what would you choose? Would you forgive the people who left you, or protect the life you built without them? Would you open the door for family again, or close it forever to keep your peace? Is blood stronger than pain, or is respect something that has to be earned? And if someone only comes back when you become successful, is that love, or just need? Tell me honestly, What would you do? I really want to hear your choice in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful emotional stories, because some stories don't just entertain, they make you question everything.